the microphone, I think, for me. It's up there. And anybody got a question? You're all looking very quiet, so let me just come and ask you what you're thinking. So, sir, tell me your name.
Helmut Valerius.
And how are you finding this? What's your question?
Well, especially the issue of cultural differences and how to overcome, or let's say, have empathy for the culture of the others is most important for global collaboration, and is an essential element for getting understanding and getting access to different cultural environments, and founding a basis for developing collaboration in to a larger extent, step by step.
And what country are you from?
I'm from Germany.
And what cultural differences do you think relate to Germany that you would think that it would be better understood by people? What would you like? What's your gift to the world?
Well, I think it's not only a question of cultural difference in a single country, but it's more a regional, let's say, from a global sense, regional cultural specificities and particularities which need to be understood. I mean, in Europe, we have a special culture of doing things. If you look into other regions of the world, they have because of the environment, because of natural differences, they have their specificities. So I think it's more to look in a global dimension, not so much at the single country.
Great. I always find actually if you're working with Germans, cakes. Germany runs on cakes. Essential that you have cakes if you want to collaborate with Germans.
Here comes the second German. I have a question for Jennie, Join, and I was discussing yesterday climate issues and Chinese culture regarding innovation. When we talk about global collaboration and we think, for example, here in Europe, we have already a lot of green technologies in place. I see on the other hand, unfortunately, because of the current situation in China with smog, and you read the media more than me maybe, there's a problem how to bring this over to China in order that it's going to be implemented. Do you have any advice for us how we should deal, I mean, as the industry, I mean, small, medium-sized enterprises with Chinese organizations to bring green technologies to China? Because there seems to be a trend, individual-driven only, to keep only your flat clean and don't care what is outside. And how is the government or how are public organizations run in order to address these issues for the better and without corruption and all that stuff?
Jennie, how would you advise?
Well, actually, other than our Chamber of Commerce that the government have and our Department of Commerce, we also have a lot of NGOs in China that start bringing delegations out here, as well as welcoming our European friends to visit China. In fact, especially in terms of European-China relationship, I think it has been always very warm and always been very successful and welcome. So you could contact me after this. I'm happy to connect you. In fact, I myself is setting up some network here so that we could start facilitating a lot more in terms of connecting the traffic. I've got one of the NGOs that is being set up now called the World Green Council, where they specifically catered for SME. In China, they are also gathering together all those that are interested in green cultures, and they try to do green e-com as well, knowing for the fact that it's not always easy to be communicating in languages verbally, electronically, get your products easily understood and throw it into their system will just work just as good.
Very good. Sir, tell me who you are first of all and where you're from.
Well, I'm Vincent Rayon, I'm French. I'm working here in Brussels for Science Europe. I feel like we have only one side of a discussion here. I would have entitled Global Challenges, Collaboration and Competition, because it was said that people need to move and there's a lot of mobility in research and innovation. And I guess Professor Bourguignon knows it well, as he's leading an agency whose aim is to attract the best researchers of the world in Europe. And I spent 2 years in Houston, in Texas, and I guess in Rice University or UT, they always try to attract the best. So there's a very strong competition in research and innovation to attract the best to your place, because the jobs and the economy will live from these people. So how do you manage to go for global collaboration and to keep the competition? And where is the balance between...
And before they answer, what's your solution? You see, I don't let people ask questions unless they have a solution. What's your solution?
Well, if we look at what's happening inside Europe, officially the policy is to have circulation in Europe, but we see with the ERC that we also have competition between different countries of Europe, and everything is based on the capacity building and attracting, having the means to attract a researcher where you are. So it's always how you build capacity and attract the best researcher to attract the other ones. But if everybody's fighting the same way, it's like at some moment you need to stop and really want collaboration and stop a little bit competition. But right now I feel there's much more competition than collaboration.
Okay, Jean-Pierre, let's take that one from you. And there is an element, of course, isn't there, that part of the advantage of actually having people in your laboratories is that you're able to equip them with skills that they hopefully then take back to their own countries. So not all of them stay, I suspect.
Well, I think, again, one thing which is very important to keep in mind is the scale, the time scale, because quite often, if you look at the situation on short term, of course, any time you take a picture of the situation, and ERC, in some sense, was taking a picture of the situation in Europe at a given moment, you do find that there are differences. There are some countries which are both more advanced or more skilled in competing for this. Part of it is definitely a true difference in the capacity. Sometimes it's also a difference in culture, because definitely some countries are not so eager to compete. Some others have been trained to compete much earlier. But if you take a much longer perspective, I want to take the example of China, which for quite some time agreed to having some of its best students go abroad. But now the tendency for China is not only to try and bring the very best back, but also to give very high responsibilities to people who have been spending a lot of time abroad. Presently, most of the president of the Chinese, most prestigious Chinese universities are people who have been spending quite some time abroad and even recognized abroad. So I think, again, this question of time scale is very important. So what at a given moment one sees as a big difference and a competition which seems to favor some countries and will be at the disadvantage of others, maybe in the long run could be actually transformed. And it's very well known in Europe that some countries are facing very severe difficulties in terms of demography. And demography in absolute terms, but also demography in terms of attracting a next generation of people studying science. So it seems to me that if you look now globally for Europe at resources in terms of people able to do science, I think we need absolutely the resources from all the countries. And therefore, it's very important that you can consider the development of research in Europe as a solidarity question, not just as a question of having a few countries succeeding and the other one being forgotten. So I think, again, depending which time scale you take, which perspective you take, you will give different answers. So from that point of view, I think when ERC was introduced, it was definitely a very critical moment for Europe to make clear that Europe was very engaged in the process of attracting the very best scientists in the world. Some of them are in Europe and you want to keep them. Some others are not in Europe and you try to attract them. But the idea is also to make sure that in the long term, the profession of researchers in Europe is a profession in which you know you will be able to develop your capacities at the highest level. And in a sense, having ERC as one of the components of the program supported by the European Union, but as you know, I mean, the amount of money that the European Union is spending on research is just a very small amount of money compared to the whole investment made by national organizations, national governments in research. So altogether, you need to make sure that the global system is facing the various challenges. And for me, at this very moment, the very most important challenge is where will be the new generation of researchers? Because there is a deficit in basically every country in the number of people studying, willing to go into the research profession, and in Europe. And therefore, we have to deal with this question very seriously. And we have to really offer perspectives for really researchers all around the world, and in particular for women. Because I think quite often the question of gender balance is presented purely as a question of justice, injustice. I think it is, of course, an injustice at the moment. But if you look at it from the point of view of resources, that's among young women in Europe, but also in some other countries in the world, that you have one of the most not exploited resource, if you allow me to use this expression, in terms of attracting a new generation of researchers. So
if I could just stop you a moment, I would say that in the UK alone, we have 56,000 women trained in science, technology, engineering and maths disciplines who are not in those disciplines. So they've all, and while some are in disciplines where they use the science, actually it's an extraordinary waste of talent. Just can I have a comment from you to the ministers, because your countries have both been through periods of isolation, and you've had a South African and an Argentinian diaspora. Have those scientists now returned to your countries, and are they the nucleus of your science now? Has that collaborative effort worked in your favor now?
Okay, we implemented a very successful policy in terms of recovering Argentinian scientists that were working abroad. It's a program called Raíces, means roots in Spanish, but it's the acronym from the network of Argentinian scientists working abroad. That started almost 5 years ago. We realized that we needed special instruments to promote the recovery or repatriation of scientists. So what we did, we changed the system. In the past, scientists had to apply individually to a position and had to look for themselves for institutions where to work. And they had to refurnish the space and then try to get some equipment. So what we did is we changed the rules. So now the institutions have to apply for position. So it's the university or the National Research Council or any institution in Argentina who submits the application and says, okay, I need an engineer or a mathematician. So once the candidate is selected, we provide money for the transportation. We pay the salary for the first 4 years. We provide money for equipment and for reconditioning the lab space if necessary. Since the start of the program, we recovered 1,038 scientists, and all of them are working either in public institutions or in private companies. And this is a small percentage. This is a decent percentage. We estimate the total numbers of scientists in around 4,000. They are very successful abroad. So somebody told me that, a few years ago that the number of Argentinians granted by the IRC were even in superior in numbers to people, to scientists from any or some of the European countries. So they have very good positions here. So it's not easy to lure them into coming back to Argentina. But thanks to this policy, we are recovering almost a full generations. In terms of the apparent contradiction between collaboration and competition, I guess we have to realize that right now the competitions are being held between multinational companies. So we don't only compete in terms of nations, but companies have headquarters in one country, R&D facilities in another. So it's clear that mobility also plays a role. Almost 3/4 of the patents granted in the US involve foreign scientists. So it's a big contribution of mobility into innovation.
Now, I'm going to now give you all a magic wand. I'm going to give you a magic wand because I'm going to ask each of you, if you have a magic wand and you ruled the world, and I'd certainly vote for you, Congresswoman, if you had a magic wand, what single thing would you do which would, as a government, that would enable greater collaboration between nations? Congresswoman.
Perhaps plan our research budgets together.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, first of all, our cycles on our budgets are very different. Some cycles are 2 years, some 1 year, and some appropriate for a 6-year period. It makes it difficult to have international planning when it is that way. But also, because many types of research are going on around the same elements around the nation, around the world at the same time, if there was more collaboration and more sharing, I think we could get to answers faster and more cheaply.
So how would you do that? I'm looking at you now because you're in this position in the European Research Council, because that's very true, isn't it? If the planning cycles are different, then it's very difficult to collaborate.
Well, actually, you know, ERC has this, as president of ERC, I have this fantastic comfort, luxury, I would say, to have a budget for 7 years ahead of me, which is no national agency, of course, knows its budget 7 years ahead. Of course, it introduces some rigidity, which means more or less we cannot change too much the pattern for 7 years. But this is certainly a luxury, which has to do with the way the European Union functions. For the magic solution, one thing which for scientists is always, I'm talking here more as a scientist, is of course very disturbing, is all the complication which has to do with the visa applications. And I understand that in recent years, of course, security, national security for many countries has become such a concern that, of course, they put, barriers of all kinds in terms of visas. I'm not sure this is really efficient in the way it is done at the moment, because actually the people who really want to get around this, they just go around this actually. And it's really the people who actually will not do any harm, which are really the most actually damaged. And for many research institutions at the moment, dealing with visas has become a major, major concern. I was the director of a small institute with having something like 200 visitors a year, and had one special person dealing with visa all the time, because that was really the major difficulty we had.
Okay, so you'd sort out visas. Minister, what would you do?
Derek. Derek doesn't really believe in magic. So,
oh, shame, shame.
I'm sorry about that. I think I would, but if I were to have this magic wand, I think I'd wave it and I'd put a bunch of top scientists together so they could invent a magic wand. More seriously, I think I would wish that in terms of the topic that we're talking about, that institutions and countries, politicians, would really see the value of institutional collaboration and collaboration between researchers. Once they see the value that in putting institutions together, you put synergies together, you put different perspectives together with a common research theme, for example, you certainly get greater than the sum of the parts, the result. And if people can start seeing the value of it, including governments, they'll invest in it. They'll start removing the barriers that we spoke about earlier, because those are country-made barriers. Visas, for example, they would also put resources into it. We just had a great meeting with the Flemish government where we launched 6 projects between South African institutions and Flemish institutions. And they're most exciting projects. But the fact of the matter is that it's really investing in long-term relationships between institutions. And in so doing, the cultural diversity, and I'm touching on something that came up earlier, it's great. But it's not a barrier. It shouldn't be a barrier. And when you put people together, you very soon discover that it's not a barrier, because at the end of the day, I'm sure you agree, Jennie, people are just very much the same, aren't they?
Jennie, your magic wand now.
Well, I think I'm a woman, so I go simple. Just give me the money and I'll spend it. I think if everybody pulled some money together, I'm sure we can have enough top talent and know where to spend the money. So it's a matter of calling probably those that have the most money and have them commit to research and innovation. And we deploy from there.
Well, I guess what we'll try to do is to devote more money for basic research than to military spending. I mean, if you compare the budgets, it's clear that we will have a huge impact in science if we just redistribute what's already being spent in other areas.
Fantastic. So I can tell you that on Twitter, great discussions, very impressive panelists. There you are. Twitter says you're very impressive panelists. So on that note, please, ladies and gentlemen, would you thank our very impressive panelists, Jean-Pierre Bourguignon, Derek Hanekom, Lino Barañao, Jennie Yeung, and Congresswoman Johnson.
And very impressive moderator, wouldn't you agree?
Okay.